The alien queen froze when she saw my wound. Part 2. The massive doors swung open with a deep rumbling sound that Marcus felt in his chest as much as he heard it. Beyond the entrance lay a chamber so vast that he could not see the ceiling even, when he craned his neck back as far as possible. The space opened up like a cathedral, but instead of stone and stained glass, everything was made from the same living organic material that comprised the rest of the ship. Walls curved upward and disappeared into shadows above, while bioluminescent veins pulsed through the surfaces in complex patterns that seemed to follow some kind of rhythm. Marcus's guards pushed him forward, and as his eyes adjusted to the different lighting in this enormous room, he began to make out details that took his breath away. The chamber was filled with beings from dozens of different species, all arranged in what was clearly some kind of formal court setting. Some stood on two legs like humans, while others moved on multiple limbs or seemed to float without any visible means of support. Their clothing and decorations varied wildly, but Marcus noticed that many of them bore similar modifications to their bodies: metallic implants, biomechanical attachments, or patches of skin that had been replaced with the same crystal-like material that made up the ship's walls. At the center of this incredible gathering, on a raised platform that seemed to grow directly from the floor, sat what could only be the queen that his guards had mentioned. Marcus had tried to prepare himself mentally for meeting an alien ruler, but nothing could have readied him for the sight of Queen Thessara. She was enormous, easily 12 feet tall even while seated, with a body that combined aspects of several earth creatures in ways that should have been horrifying, but somehow came across as magnificent instead. Her torso was humanoid in basics, shape, but covered in plates of natural armor that shifted colors like an oil slick as she moved. 4 powerful arms extended from her shoulders, each one ending in hands that had too many fingers tipped with claws that looked sharp enough to cut through metal. Her head was the most alien feature of all, elongated and featuring compound eyes that covered nearly half of her face. These eyes seemed to be made up of thousands of individual lenses, and they reflected the chamber's bioluminescent lighting in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Despite her alien appearance, there was something undeniably regal about Queen Thessara. She held herself with the kind of absolute authority that could only come from generations of unquestioned rule. When she moved, even slightly, the entire assembly of beings around her seemed to hold their breath in anticipation. Her presence filled the enormous chamber in a way that had nothing to do with her physical size. Marcus was forced to his knees by his guards, a position that gave him an even better view of the alien court surrounding him. He could see scientists with elaborate biomechanical equipment attached to their bodies, military officers whose armor seemed to be partially alive and breathing, and what appeared to be nobles or advisors wearing clothing that shifted and changed color as he watched. All of them were staring at him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to what looked almost like fear. The queen leaned forward on her throne, which Marcus now realized was not separate furniture, but actually part of her body, grown from the same organic material as everything else in this place. Her compound eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. When she spoke, her voice was surprisingly melodic, though the translation implant in his head rendered her words in perfect English. "So this is the creature my forces found drifting in the wreckage," Queen Thessara said, and her voice carried easily through the vast chamber without any apparent amplification. "The scan suggested something unusual, but I needed to see for myself before I could believe it." Marcus tried to keep his expression neutral, drawing on his military training to maintain composure in what was clearly a very dangerous situation. He had been in difficult circumstances before, though admittedly none quite like this one. The important thing was to gather information and look for any opportunity that might present itself. "You may speak, human," the queen continued, and Marcus was surprised that she knew the name of his species. "Tell me your designation and the purpose of your presence in our territory." "Captain Marcus Chen of the Earth Defense Force," he replied, keeping his voice steady despite the surreal circumstances. "My ship was on a reconnaissance mission when your forces attacked without warning. I demand to know why you have taken me prisoner and what has happened to my crew." A ripple of what sounded like laughter passed through the assembled court. though it came out as various clicks, chirps, and other alien sounds that his translation implant could not fully process. The Queen herself seemed amused by his defiant response. "Demand?" she repeated. And now there was definitely humor in her voice, though it had a sharp edge that suggested the situation could turn dangerous very quickly. "You are in no position to make demands, little human. But I will answer your question because I am curious about your species. Your crew is dead. Their ship was completely destroyed in the attack. Only you survived, and only because my forces detected something unusual about your biological signature." The news about his crew hit Marcus like a physical blow, though he tried not to let the reaction show on his face. He had known the odds of survival were slim when their small reconnaissance vessel had been ambushed by what appeared to be an entire alien battle fleet, but he had held on to hope that some of his people might have made it to the escape pods. As these thoughts ran through his mind, Marcus shifted position slightly to ease the pressure on his knees. The movement caused his torn sleeve to ride up his arm, exposing more of the deep gash he had received during the battle. The wound was still painful, but as he glanced down at it, Marcus was struck by how much better it looked than it had just a few hours earlier. The edges were no longer as ragged, and what had been a deep cut showing bone underneath was now clearly beginning to close. The change in the chamber's atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Queen Thesara's compound eyes locked onto his exposed wound with such intensity that Marcus could almost feel her gaze like a physical weight. Her forearms went completely still, and the color-shifting patterns in her armor ceased their constant movement. Around the chamber, conversations stopped mid-sentence as everyone noticed their queen's sudden focus. Marcus looked up from his arm to find that every eye in the vast chamber was now fixed on the same spot. The silence stretched out, uncomfortably, broken only by the soft pulsing sounds of the ship's biological systems. Some of the court members had actually taken steps backward, as if they were afraid of what they were seeing. The Queen rose slowly from her throne, her 12-foot height making her tower over everyone else in the chamber. Her compound eyes never left Marcus's healing wound as she descended the steps of her platform, with movements that were surprisingly graceful for someone so large. When she spoke again, her voice was completely different from before, softer, almost reverent, and filled with what sounded like genuine shock. "Show me your arm," she commanded, but her tone was more of a request than an order. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then extended his injured arm toward her. Queen Thesara moved closer, close enough that he could see the individual facets of her compound eyes and hear her breathing, which sounded almost like purring. She stared at his wound with the intensity of someone examining the most precious treasure in the universe. "The healing rate," she whispered, and Marcus realized she was not speaking to him but to herself. "The cellular regeneration patterns, the resistance to infection and necrosis, it cannot be possible, and yet here it is before me." The Queen straightened up and looked directly into Marcus's eyes. When she spoke again, it was in a language that his translation implant somehow recognized as archaic human English, a dialect that should not have existed anywhere in the galaxy except in Earth's historical databases. "You," she said, and her voice shook with an emotion Marcus could not identify. "You cannot be real." The alien queen froze. When she saw my wound, Part 1 Captain Marcus Chen's eyes opened slowly to the sound of humming electricity and distant mechanical noises. His head throbbed with a sharp pain that made him wince as he tried to remember what had happened. The last thing he could recall was the bright flash of enemy weapons tearing through his reconnaissance ship's hull, the screaming of metal being ripped apart, and the desperate shouts of his crew over the communication system. Now, he found himself lying on what felt like a cold, smooth surface that seemed to pulse gently beneath his body. As his vision cleared, Marcus realized he was not in any human-made prison cell. The walls around him were made of some kind of translucent crystal that glowed with a soft blue light from within. The material looked organic somehow, as if it had been grown rather than constructed. Strange patterns flowed through the crystal like veins, carrying light from one part of the wall to another in slow, hypnotic waves. Marcus tried to sit up and immediately felt a sharp pain shoot through his left arm. Looking down, he saw that his military uniform was torn in several places and dark stains of dried blood covered much of the fabric. A particularly nasty gash ran across his left forearm, the wound still fresh and angry-looking. The cut was deep enough that he could see the white of bone beneath the torn flesh, and blood had crusted around the edges in thick, dark clots. He examined his other injuries with the methodical precision that military training had drilled into him. There were numerous smaller cuts on his hands and face, probably from flying debris when his ship had been destroyed. His ribs ached when he breathed, suggesting he had taken a hard impact during the battle. But somehow, despite the violence of the attack and the obvious severity of his wounds, Marcus felt remarkably alert and aware of his surroundings. The cell he found himself in was roughly 10 feet square, with no visible door or opening. The crystal walls were perfectly smooth and appeared to be several inches thick. When he placed his palm against the surface, he could feel a gentle warmth radiating from within, and the veins of light seemed to pulse slightly faster in response to his touch. It was both beautiful and deeply unsettling, like being trapped inside some kind of living jewel. As Marcus explored his prison, he began to hear sounds from beyond the crystal walls. There were voices speaking in languages he did not recognize, though they did not sound entirely alien. Some of the tones and rhythms were almost familiar, as if they were distorted versions of human speech patterns. Mixed with the voices were other sounds that were definitely not human. Clicking noises like insects might make, low thrumming sounds that seemed to vibrate through the floor, and occasional mechanical whirs and beeps that suggested advanced technology at work. Through the translucent walls, Marcus could make out moving shadows and shapes that indicated other prisoners in similar cells nearby. Some of the shadows were roughly humanoid, while others had distinctly non-human proportions. One shape appeared to have multiple arms, while another seemed far too tall and thin to be anything from Earth. The realization that he was not the only captive gave him a strange mixture of comfort and concern. His contemplation was interrupted by a sudden change in the lighting around his cell. The blue glow from the walls intensified, and new patterns began flowing through the crystal veins much faster than before. A section of what he had thought was solid wall began to dissolve, the crystal material flowing away like thick liquid to create an opening large enough for someone to walk through. Through this newly formed doorway came his first clear look at his captors, and Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. The beings that entered his cell were unlike anything he had ever seen, yet they carried themselves with an unmistakable air of intelligence and purpose. They stood roughly 8 feet tall on powerful legs that ended in clawed feet. Their bodies were covered in what looked like natural armor plating that shifted in color from deep green to purple as they moved. Most striking were their heads, which were elongated and featured multiple eyes that seemed to track independently of each other. The lead figure carried what was obviously a weapon, though its design was completely unfamiliar to Marcus. The device seemed to be made of the same living crystal as the walls, and it pulsed with energy that made the air around it shimmer. When this being spoke, its voice came out as a series of clicks and harmonics that Marcus's mind somehow translated into understandable words, though he had no idea how this was possible. "The specimen is conscious and appears functional," the creature said to its companion. "The healing rate is remarkable for such a primitive species. Most captives would still be unconscious from injuries this severe." Marcus realized that some kind of translation device must have been implanted in him while he was unconscious. The technology was far more advanced than anything humanity had developed, providing not just word-for-word translation, but somehow conveying meaning and context as well. The second guard moved closer to examine Marcus, its multiple eyes focusing on different parts of his body simultaneously. The initial scans were correct. This one matches the biological markers described in the ancient texts. The Queen will be very interested to see a live specimen of this species. Ancient texts? Marcus thought to himself, but he kept his expression neutral. These beings, apparently, had some kind of prior knowledge about humans, which was impossible. Humanity had only recently developed interstellar travel capabilities, and this was their first contact with alien life forms. How could these creatures have ancient records of his species? The first guard gestured for Marcus to stand, and when he hesitated, both weapons were pointed in his direction. The message was clear enough without words. Marcus got to his feet, slowly, testing his balance and assessing his physical condition. Despite his injuries, he felt surprisingly steady. The gash on his arm still hurt, but the pain seemed to be lessening rather than getting worse. As they escorted him from the cell, Marcus got his first good look at the vessel he was imprisoned on. The corridors were works of art in themselves, with walls that curved and flowed like the inside of some massive living creature. Bioluminescent panels provided light that seemed to respond to movement, brightening as they approached and dimming after they passed. The floors had a slightly springy quality that made walking feel almost bouncy, as if the entire ship was constructed from organic materials rather than metal and plastic. They passed dozens of other cells, each containing prisoners from species Marcus had never imagined could exist. Some were humanoid but with obvious differences like extra limbs or unusual skin colors. Others were so alien that he could not even guess what their original environment might have been like. What struck him most was the condition of the other prisoners. Many appeared to be suffering from untreated wounds and infections. Injuries that looked days or weeks old showed no signs of healing, and several prisoners appeared to be in serious medical distress. This observation puzzled Marcus greatly. His own wounds, while still painful, already seemed to be showing signs of improvement. The bleeding had stopped completely, and when he looked carefully at the gash on his arm, he could swear that the edges of the wound looked slightly less ragged than they had when he first woke up. It was subtle, but his military medic training had taught him to observe such details carefully. The guards led him through what felt like miles of corridors, past chambers filled with incomprehensible technology, and areas where other alien beings worked at tasks he could not begin to understand. Everything about the ship suggested a civilization far more advanced than humanity, with technology that blended organic and mechanical elements in ways that seemed almost magical. Finally, they stopped before a set of massive doors that towered at least 20 feet high. The surface of these doors was covered in intricate carvings that seemed to move and shift when Marcus looked at them directly. His guards spoke briefly into small devices, and after a moment, the doors began to open with a sound like distant thunder. Beyond those doors lay whatever fate awaited him, and Marcus steeled himself for whatever was to come. The alien queen froze when she saw my wound. Part 5. Marcus stood before the massive, pulsing core of the ship, feeling its rhythm synchronize with his own heartbeat in a way that was both comforting and deeply unsettling. The organic structure towered above them like a living cathedral, its neural pathways crackling with energy that made the air around it shimmer and hum. Queen Thessera moved to a control panel that seemed to grow from the floor itself, her forearms working at interfaces that responded to her touch with ripples of bioluminescent light. The process is not well understood, she admitted as she worked. The ancient texts speak in riddles and metaphors. They mention placing hands upon the heart of the vessel and allowing life force to flow into its systems. But they also warn of great danger and the possibility of transformation rather than simple death. Marcus nodded, trying to appear more confident than he felt. The ship continued to shake around them as the void hunger drew closer, and he could hear the distant sounds of panic and desperation from crew members throughout the vessel. Through the walls, he could sense rather than see the growing sphere of nothingness that threatened to erase them all from existence. "How much time do we have left?" he asked. Queen Thessara consulted a display that showed swirling patterns instead of numbers. "Less than 2 hours. The expansion rate has increased again. It seems to accelerate as it consumes more matter and energy." Marcus approached the core, and as he drew nearer, he could feel something responding to his presence. The pulsing rhythms grew stronger, and tendrils of energy began reaching toward him like curious fingers. When one of them brushed against his injured arm, he felt a shock of connection that ran through his entire nervous system. "I can feel it," he said in amazement. "The ship is alive, and it knows I am here. All Zephyrian vessels are living creatures, as much as they are machines," Queen Thessara explained. "This one has served my people for over 3 centuries. It has witnessed the destruction of dozens of worlds and the deaths of thousands of crew members. It understands sacrifice." "Marcus, placed his palms against the warm surface of the core, and immediately he felt a rush of sensations that threatened to overwhelm him. Through the ship's bio-neural network, he could sense every part of the vessel. The crew members working frantically at their stations, the injured beings in the medical bays, the fear that permeated every corridor and chamber. But beneath all of that, he could feel something else. Hope. "The crew knows what you are attempting," Queen Thesara said softly. "Word has spread throughout the ship. For the first time in 1,000 years, my people believe there might be a way to fight back. Instead of just running." As Marcus maintained contact with the core, he began to understand what the ancient texts had been trying to describe. His life force, the energy that powered his remarkable healing abilities, was flowing into the ship's systems. But instead of draining him and leaving him weakened, something unexpected was happening. The ship's own bio-neural network was adapting to his energy patterns, incorporating his healing factor into its basic operating systems. "This is not what I expected," Marcus said, his voice filled with wonder. "I am not dying. The ship is changing." "Queen." Thesara moved closer to observe what was happening, her compound eyes shifting through colors of amazement and hope. "The neural pathways are restructuring themselves," she said. "The ship's biological systems are becoming more resilient, more able to regenerate damage. You are not sacrificing your life. You are sharing it." The ship shuddered again, but this time it felt different. Instead of the groaning sounds of a structure under stress, Marcus could hear what sounded almost like a roar of defiance. Through the bio-neural network, he sensed the vessel's hull beginning to adapt and strengthen itself. Areas that had been damaged by the approach of the void hunger were healing with the same rapid regeneration that characterized human biology. "It is working," Queen Thesara whispered. "The ship is developing resistance to the erasure effect. But will it be enough?" Marcus pushed more of his energy into the core, feeling the connection between himself and the ship grow stronger with each passing moment. Through the vessel's sensors, he could perceive the void hunger directly, and what he sensed shocked him. The cosmic horror was not just a mindless force of destruction. There was an intelligence behind it, ancient and malevolent, that had been consuming galaxies for eons beyond counting. But for the first time, Marcus could sense uncertainty in that intelligence. The void hunger was encountering something it had never experienced before, a form of existence that could resist its erasure effects. The sphere of nothingness had actually slowed its expansion as it approached their ship, as if the entity behind it was trying to understand what it was facing. "We need to do more than just resist," Marcus realized. "We need to fight back." He opened himself completely to the bio-neural network, allowing his life force to flow not just into the ship's basic systems, but into its weapons and propulsion as well. The vessel's living weapons began to pulse with new energy, powered by the same force that allowed humans to heal from impossible wounds and survive against overwhelming odds. "Marcus," Queen Thesara said urgently, "the ship is preparing to attack the void hunger directly. No weapon has ever been able to affect it before. If this fails, we will be consumed within minutes." "Then we better make sure it does not fail," Marcus replied, his voice filled with determination that surprised even himself. The ship fired its weapons at the sphere of nothingness, but these were not the same bioenergy blasts that Zephyrian technology normally produced. Infused with Marcus's life force, the weapons carried something the void hunger had never encountered: the stubborn refusal of humanity to simply cease existing. Where the enhanced weapons struck the sphere, something unprecedented happened. Instead of being absorbed and adding to the void's power, the energy blasts created ripples and cracks in the nothingness. For the first time in cosmic ages, the void hunger was taking damage. The entity's reaction was immediate and violent. The sphere began pulsing with malevolent energy as it tried to accelerate its approach to their ship, but Marcus could feel through the bio-neural network that the vessel was more than ready for this assault. The ship's hull, now infused with human regenerative properties, actually grew stronger as the void tried to erase it. "Keep firing," Marcus commanded, though he was not sure if he was speaking to Queen Thesara or to the ship itself. "Hit it with everything we have." The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. A living ship powered by human determination faced off against a cosmic horror that had consumed entire civilizations. Each weapon blast created new cracks in the sphere of nothingness, while the Void's attempts to erase the ship only made it more resilient and defiant. Finally, with a sound like reality itself screaming, the sphere began to collapse inward on itself. The intelligence behind the Void hunger, faced with something it could not understand or overcome, chose retreat over continued assault. The nothingness contracted rapidly, shrinking back toward whatever dimension it had emerged from, leaving behind space that slowly filled with stars and matter that had been held in temporal stasis. Marcus collapsed to his knees as the connection with the ship's core finally broke, but he was smiling despite his exhaustion. Around them, the vessel was celebrating in its own organic way, bioluminescent patterns of joy flowing through every wall and corridor, while the crew's voices could be heard throughout the ship expressing amazement and gratitude. Queen Thessara knelt beside Marcus, her compound eyes showing colors he now recognized as relief and wonder. "You have done something that was thought impossible," she said. "You have given my people hope for the first time in a millennium." Marcus looked at his arm where the original wound had completely healed, leaving not even a scar behind. "This is just the beginning," he said. "I need to send a message to Earth. My people need to know what is out here, and your people need to know that you are not alone anymore." The Queen nodded, understanding immediately what he meant. "An alliance between our species, the healing race and the survivors of Zephyrus Prime, working together to protect the galaxy from threats like the Void hunger." As Marcus composed his message to Earth, he could feel the ship around them settling into new patterns of existence, forever changed by their connection. The bio-neural network now carried traces of human resilience that would be passed on to every Zephyrian vessel it encountered. They had not just won a battle, they had begun the transformation of an entire civilization. The message he finally sent was simple, but filled with promise. "We found them. They need us. And together we are going to save the universe." The alien queen froze when she saw my wound. Part 4. The ship shuddered violently around them, and Marcus could hear the groaning sounds of the living vessel's structure under stress. Emergency lights began flashing in patterns that hurt his eyes, while the bioluminescent veins in the walls pulsed frantically like a panicked heartbeat. Queen Thessara moved with surprising speed for someone so large, her forearms working controls that seemed to grow from the walls themselves as she touched them. "Report!" she commanded into a communication device that resembled a flowering plant more than any technology Marcus recognized. The response came through in the clicking language of the Zephyrians, but Marcus's translation implant converted it into words that chilled him to the bone. "My queen." The anomaly appeared without warning at the edge of the system. "It is already consuming the outer planets. Current rate of expansion suggests we have less than 6 hours before it reaches our position." Marcus watched as Queen Thessara's compound eyes cycled through colors he had never seen before, patterns that his brain interpreted as pure terror. She turned to face him, and for a moment he saw not an alien conqueror, but simply a being confronted with her worst nightmare. "You must understand," she said, her voice shaking despite her obvious attempts to maintain control. "When the void hunger appears, it does not simply destroy things. It removes them from existence entirely. The planets it has already touched are not just gone, they never were. If you had friends or family on those worlds, you would not even remember them because they have been erased from the timeline itself." The concept was so alien to human understanding that Marcus struggled to wrap his mind around it. "How is that possible?" he asked. "How can something erase the past?" "We do not know," Queen Thessara admitted. "Our greatest scientists spent centuries trying to understand it before they too were consumed. What we do know is that it feeds on existence itself. Matter, energy, space, time, even memory and history. The only thing that has ever shown any resistance to it was a fragment of our ancient archives that mentioned your species." Another violent tremor ran through the ship, and Marcus could hear distant screams and shouts from other parts of the vessel. Through the translucent walls, he could see the shadows of crew members running in panic. The Queen moved to what appeared to be a viewing portal and gestured for Marcus to join her. What Marcus saw outside the ship defied every law of physics he understood. Where there should have been stars and space, there was instead a growing sphere of absolute nothingness that seemed to devour light itself. It was not black or dark. Those were still colors, still things that existed. This was the complete absence of anything, a hole in reality that hurt to look at directly. 3 star systems have already been consumed, Queen Thessara said quietly. Billions of lives, entire civilizations with histories stretching back thousands of years, all gone as if they never existed. And it continues to grow. Marcus watched, in horrified fascination as what appeared to be a massive space station disappeared into the expanding void. One moment it was there, a gleaming structure that must have housed millions of beings, and the next moment there was simply nothing. Not debris, not empty space, but a complete absence that made his eyes water when he tried to focus on it. The escape pods, he said suddenly. Can your people evacuate to other ships? The Queen made a sound that might have been bitter laughter. We have tried that strategy many times before. The void hunger moves faster than our fastest ships. It appears to be able to manipulate space itself to accelerate its expansion. Running is only a temporary solution, and we are running out of places to run to. As if to emphasize her point, alerts began sounding throughout the chamber indicating that the evacuation attempt was already underway, but that many ships were being consumed before they could reach safe distance. Marcus watched the Queen's compound eyes as she received report after report of vessels and crews being lost to the expanding nothingness. There has to be something we can do, Marcus said, though he had no idea what that might be. His military training had never prepared him for a threat that could erase reality itself. Queen Thessara turned to study him with renewed intensity. The ancient texts speak of the healing race not just as beings who could resist the void hunger, but as those who could actually fight it. They describe a ritual or process that could turn the life force of one of your people into a weapon against the erasure of existence. What kind of ritual? Marcus asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. The archives are not clear on the details, the Queen admitted. They speak of the ship's core, of sacrifice, and of transformation. But the texts are written in metaphorical language that is difficult to interpret literally. Another massive shudder ran through the vessel, and this time Marcus could hear the sound of the ship's biological system screaming in what sounded like pain. Through the viewing portal, he could see that the sphere of nothingness had grown, noticeably larger in just the few minutes they had been watching. Show me, Marcus said suddenly. Take me to this ship's core. If there is even a chance that I can help, we have to try. Queen Thessara stared at him for a long moment. You do not understand what you are offering. The texts suggest that the process requires the complete sacrifice of the individual involved. You would be giving up your life with no guarantee of success. Marcus thought of his crew, already dead because of this conflict between species he had never heard of until today. He thought of the billions of beings being erased from existence by something that defied all rational understanding. Most of all he thought of Earth and humanity, still completely unaware of the cosmic horror that was consuming the galaxy. My crew died fighting an enemy they did not understand, he said finally. If my death can stop this thing and protect others, then it is a sacrifice worth making. The Queen studied him with all of her compound eyes, and Marcus got the impression that she was seeing him not just as an individual, but as a representative of his entire species. When she spoke, there was something like reverence in her voice. The courage of the healing race, she whispered. The ancient text spoke of this as well. Very well, Marcus Cheneverth, I will take you to the ship's core. But you should know that once we begin this process, there will be no turning back. She moved toward a section of wall that began to dissolve at her approach, creating a passageway that had not existed moments before. As they left the throne chamber, Marcus could feel the ship continuing to shake around them, and the emergency lighting was becoming more frantic with each passing minute. The corridors they traveled through, were filled with crew members working desperately to keep their vessel functional in the face of the approaching void. Some were tending to wounded comrades, others were operating equipment Marcus could not identify, and all of them looked up as their queen passed with expressions of hope mixed with desperation. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked as they walked. "According to the last report, approximately 4 hours before the void hunger reaches our position," Queen Thessara replied, "but its expansion rate appears to be accelerating. We may have less time than that." They descended deeper into the ship through passages that felt increasingly organic, as if they were traveling through the arteries of some massive creature. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to be responding to their presence, and Marcus could hear what sounded almost like a heartbeat echoing through the structure around them. Finally, they emerged into a chamber that took Marcus's breath away. At the center of the space was a massive organic structure that pulsed with inner light, clearly the living heart of the entire vessel. Tendrils and neural pathways extended from it in all directions, connecting to every part of the ship. It was both beautiful and terrible, a fusion of biology and technology that humanity had never dreamed possible. "This is our ship's core," Queen Thessara said solemnly. "If the ancient texts are correct, this is where your sacrifice might be able to save us all." The alien queen froze when she saw my wound. Part 3. The silence in the vast chamber stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Marcus could feel hundreds of alien eyes watching him, waiting for something to happen, though he had no idea what. They expected. Queen Thessara continued to stare at his healing wound with an expression that mixed wonder and terror in equal measure. Her compound eyes shifted through colors Marcus had never seen before, patterns of light that seemed to indicate deep emotional turmoil. Finally, the queen stepped back and raised all 4 of her arms. When she spoke, her voice carried the absolute authority of someone who had ruled for centuries and was accustomed to instant obedience. "Everyone will leave this chamber immediately," she commanded, and her words echoed through the vast space. "Clear the court. All guards, all advisors, all observers. I require complete privacy with the prisoner." The reaction was immediate but clearly reluctant. Marcus could see that many of the assembled beings wanted to stay and witness whatever was about to happen, but none of them dared to question their queen's direct order. The chamber began to empty as dozens of different species filed out through various exits, some walking on legs, others floating or moving in ways that defied easy description. The process took several minutes, and throughout it all, Queen Thessara never took her gaze off Marcus. When the last of her court had disappeared and the massive doors had closed behind them, the queen seemed to deflate slightly. The rigid posture of absolute authority relaxed, and for the first time Marcus could see something almost vulnerable in her alien features. She moved back to her throne and settled onto it with a heavy sigh that sounded remarkably human, despite coming from such an obviously non-human source. "Do you know what you are?" she asked Marcus, and her voice was completely different now. Gone was the commanding tone she had used with her court. Instead, she sounded tired, almost defeated. "Do you have any understanding of what your existence means?" Marcus remained kneeling but looked up to meet her gaze directly. "I am a human being from the planet Earth," he said carefully. "I am a military officer serving my people in the exploration of space. Beyond that, I do not understand what you are asking me." Queen Thessara made a sound that might have been laughter, but it held no humor whatsoever. "Earth," she repeated, and the way she said the name suggested it held special significance for her. "Of course you would call it that. The ancient text said your people were simple and direct in their naming conventions." "What ancient texts?" Marcus demanded, his military training warring with his curiosity. "How can you have ancient texts about my species? Humans only developed interstellar travel within the last 50 years. We have never encountered alien life before this moment." The queen was quiet for a long time, and Marcus could see her compound eyes moving in patterns that suggested deep thought. When she finally spoke, her words came slowly, as if she was choosing each one with great care. "My people are called the Zephyrians. she began. "We have ruled this section of the galaxy for over 2,000 years, building an empire that spans hundreds of star systems. We are conquerors, Marcus Chen of Earth. We take what we need and subjugate those who cannot. Resist us. This is how we have survived and thrived for so long." Marcus said nothing, sensing that interrupting would be a mistake. The Queen continued, her voice growing heavier with each word. "But we were not always conquerors. Once we were explorers and builders, much like your people appear to be now. We had a beautiful homeworld called Zephyrus Prime, with crystal cities that reached toward the stars and technology that could create wonders beyond imagination. We thought we were the masters of our destiny." The Queen paused, and Marcus saw something that shocked him, what looked like tears forming in her compound eyes, though they glittered with strange colors instead of being clear like human tears. "Then the void hunger came," she whispered, and her voice was filled with a terror so deep that Marcus felt it in his own chest. "It appeared at the edge of our solar system like a sphere of absolute nothingness. Not darkness. Darkness is still something. This was the complete absence of everything. Matter, energy, even space and time itself simply ceased to exist wherever it touched." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The way the Queen described this thing made it sound like something from humanity's worst nightmares about cosmic horror. "We tried to fight it," Queen Thesara continued. "Our most advanced weapons, our most powerful ships, our greatest scientific minds. Nothing we did had any effect. The void hunger simply consumed everything we threw at it and continued to grow larger. When it touched our homeworld, Zephyrus Prime did not just die. It ceased to have ever existed. Our history, our culture, our very identity was erased from reality itself." The Queen stood up from her throne and began to pace back and forth, her forearms moving in agitated gestures as she spoke. "Those of us who escaped became refugees in our own galaxy, but the void hunger followed us, appearing at random locations throughout our territory. We learned that the only way to stay ahead of it was to constantly move, never settling in one place for long. And to survive, we needed resources, food, materials, energy. That is when we became conquerors. We had to take what we needed from other worlds because we no longer had a home of our own." Marcus was beginning to understand the scope of what she was telling him, but he still did not see how it connected to his own species. "This is terrible," he said honestly, "but I still do not understand what this has to do with humans." Queen Thesara stopped pacing and looked directly at him. "In our most ancient archives, saved from Zephyrus Prime before its destruction, there are texts that speak of the end times when the void hunger would threaten all life in the universe. These prophecies describe a species that would appear when the need was greatest, beings whose life force burned so brightly that they could resist even the complete erasure of existence." She moved closer to Marcus and knelt down so that her face was level with his. "The texts call them the healing race, beings who could regenerate from any wound, survive any poison, overcome any disease. They would be the key to finally defeating the void hunger and restoring balance to the universe." Marcus looked down at his arm where the deep gash was now visibly smaller than it had been just an hour earlier. The implications of what the Queen was saying began to sink in, and he felt a mixture of excitement and terror. "You think humans are this healing race from your prophecies?" he asked. "I do not think it," Queen Thesara replied. "I know it. Your wound should have killed you from blood loss and infection within hours. Instead, it heals before my eyes. The biotoxins we use to process new prisoners should have left you unconscious for days. Instead, you woke up alert and strong. Every sign points to the same conclusion." Before Marcus could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the vast chamber. The bioluminescent veins in the walls pulsed rapidly in patterns that clearly indicated danger. Queen Thesara's compound eyes went wide with fear, and she jumped to her feet with surprising speed. "No," she whispered. "Not now. Not when I have finally found one of them." The chamber began to shake, and Marcus could hear distant sounds of panic and confusion from other parts of the ship. Through the walls he could see flashes of light that looked like weapons fire. Queen Thesara turned to him with desperation in her voice. "The void hunger has found us again, and this time, there may be nowhere left to run.